Afternoon. Hopefully everyone is now easing into their second drink, and this will make my talk a little more interesting and palatable. Gillian and Graham, thanks so much for inviting me back to the Mining Club. I first presented here at this great club in 2001. That's 22 years ago now, when I tried to convince you that gold mining in China was a great opportunity. And over the next 8 years, between 2001 and 2009, I think we all learned a lot about China. And we did, as Sino Gold, manage to mine gold profitably in that country. Thanks, Charlie. In 2011, I presented for the first time the vision and strategy of a newly formed company called Evolution. And as you've just heard from Laurie, over the last 12 years, we've been able to assemble an amazing portfolio of long-life, low-cost assets, which has been made even better this week by the acquisition of the iconic North Parkes mine located right here in New South Wales and being returned back to Australian hands. Our Cal gold mine in the Bland Shire is located only an hour away from North Parkes, and in many ways it was our great experience at Cal that motivated us to acquire another operation in that region, the Central West. So thank you, Brian, Ali and Phyllis, for making our experience so good that we were willing and able to acquire our next property nearby. Thank you. So here I am back again in December 2023 with the task of convincing you that whilst Mount Rawdon operation may have the shortest mine life in our portfolio, the opportunity to transition the mine to a renewable energy project means that it has the potential to be one of the most valuable assets in our portfolio. Now that's going to be a challenge, because after more than 20 years of continuous mining operations, in the middle of next year, mining is scheduled to stop, and that will bring gold production to an end after we process the remaining low-grade stockpiles that are on surface. But we have been working very hard for the story not to simply end there. And in potentially the next phase of its life, I think Mount Rawdon could not only be valuable for Evolution shareholders and our partners in this project, ICA, but could be a much-needed good news story for our industry. Because over the next few minutes, I'm hoping to convince you that this depleted gold mine can be turned into a valuable 100-year renewable infrastructure asset, generating clean energy, cheaper power, and creating regional jobs. Like everything I've presented in the past at the Mining Club, I always believe a business opportunity needs to be based on good strategy. As one of my good friends once told me, who's in the startup space, and he's done a number of successful startups, you cannot build a business with a solution looking for a problem to fix. You have to have a solution to fix a problem. And here I think the problem we're facing is without precedent and indisputable. Hopefully this is going to work. It is. I think a good starting point is to step back and look at global carbon emissions. So here's a chart that tracks emissions over the last 170 years. Over that period, they've increased 30 times, with the biggest increases in the post-World War II era. I think it is now widely accepted and scientifically proven that this is contributing to increasing temperatures and climate extremes. And I think even everyone in this room would agree to that. This recognition culminated in the so-called Paris Agreement, which is a legally binding international treaty on climate change adopted by 196 parties at the COP21, the UN Climate Change Conference, which was held in 2015. Its overarching goal, the Paris Agreement, is to hold, and I'm quoting here, to hold the increase in the global average temperature to well below 2 degrees Celsius and above, which is just 2 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And there's an and here, and pursue efforts, and I'm quoting again, to limit the temperature increases to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. For context, to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees, greenhouse gas emissions globally must decline by 45% by 2030. So it sounds pretty good. Multinational commitments by 196 countries to get this solved. So how are we going? Not that good. Because we're actually going really badly. Because compared to 2010 levels, emissions are projected to rise by 9%, when they really need to fall by 45%. So where does Australia fit in all of this? Well, it's definitely in the newspapers every day, and I can tell you as someone who's sat on a public company board since 2001, it is front and centre of board discussions today and probably wasn't even mentioned in 2001. Climate change has definitely become front page news and remains highly politicised. I think it's fair to say we were slow adopters as a country of a transition to renewable energy, but we now seem to have conceded the need for action, and we are now well and truly committed. In fact, we've become so committed, we now, by global standards, have aggressive targets which the federal government has set. They have committed our country to go from a current base of 36% renewables to 82% by 2030. That's a huge, huge lift in 7 years. And that challenge is unbelievably big. Because as you can see, we are still largely dependent, almost 50% of our energy is generated by coal. And to deliver on our commitments, we'll need to construct 28 gigawatts of new wind and solar capacity and 13 gigawatts of new storage capacity to support that wind and solar. To say that this is going to cost tens of billions of dollars is a massive understatement. But it's not even the cost that's enormous. It's the sheer magnitude of the scale of construction that's required to construct this infrastructure. Not only the generation and the storage, which we've talked about, but the new transmission lines required to connect this new grid. The government is right in calling it rewiring the nations, because that is literally what is required. So I hope that defines the problem clearly. And building on advice, again, that I've previously been given, someone once told me that one of the greatest commercial opportunities is a government policy that doesn't have a credible plan or solution to deliver on it. And here is one. Whilst I don't claim to have the whole solution, we do think we have a very important piece of that. Because here's Queensland, and they committed to a Green Olympics in 2032, which the government made as an undertaking to hold the Olympics in Brisbane. That's also a huge jump from 23% to 70% by 2032, which, as I understand, is contractually committed by the Queensland government, or at least a stated principle of why the Games was awarded to Brisbane at that time. But in Australia, let's look on the bright side for a minute. We do have an abundance of sunshine. That's the bright side, which is useful for solar generation, and we do have lots of wind. We, of course, also have lots of space. So there is plenty of capacity to generate solar and wind power. But what happens when the wind isn't blowing, or at night when the sun isn't shining? And that's why our partners, ICA, who are represented here by Michael Seedy and Aaron Simcock, who really have been renewable experts. They run ICA Partners as a leading advisory group in the renewable space. And they're the brains behind all of this, by the way. They recognise that firming, which is really the storage of energy, is the most strategic and valuable part of our country's transition to renewables. And as one of their founders, Michael Seedy, told me over dinner the other night, they literally used Google Maps and sent people out into the field to inspect potential sites that could be locations for pumped hydro projects. That's right, isn't it, Michael? The key attributes they were looking for were head heights, which is basically the vertical drop from the upper reservoir to the lower reservoir, closeness to the grid, and preferably a disturbed site, which would make permitting a lot easier. 4 years ago, after an extensive search, they approached us and said they'd identified Mount Rawdon as the most suitable location for a pumped hydro generator in Australia. We didn't, and I certainly didn't, really know what they were talking about. But we did think it was a great way to close a mine that was depleting of its gold. So we agreed to a 50-50 deal where we could both fund the feasibility study. So 4 years and $20 million later, I am a true believer. What is pumped hydro? Do I need to click this again? I think I do. So the pumped hydro generator is essentially a giant battery. When energy demand and prices are high, water is released from the upper reservoir, flowing downhill with tremendous force, which is effectively the energy. It flows through the turbines, which you can see turning now, and in our case there'll be 6, and generates energy which is transmitted into the power grid for distribution. Then when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing and electricity prices are cheap, the water in the lower reservoir is pumped back up to the upper reservoir. And so you have the cycle again. So it's a closed circuit essentially. The head height is really important because it's a key factor in determining how efficiently the energy can be generated. And in our case, as ICA identified, 550 meters is really, really high. By comparison, and Graham, it's only a planned Barumba pumped hydro. It is in the strategic plan, but it's got a long, long way to be developed. I believe there are turtles on the site which could be problematic. But the Barumba pumped hydro scheme, which will generate a similar amount of power, only has a head height of 330 meters. The other attributes that Mount Rawdon has that makes it competitively advantageous is that it's located only 26 kilometres from the east coast 250 kVA transmission line, and even better, the proposed new so-called supergrid, the 500 kVA line, effectively runs right through Mount Rawdon. The open pit, which has already been mined out for gold, we've spent over $1 billion mining there in costs, will be repurposed as the lower reservoir. And being situated on disturbed sites with good access, a good workforce, site services, and a massive database of environmental and geotechnical information also provide the project with a huge competitive advantage. And I'm sure Simon in the Genex Kidston example, that was a huge contributing to the ability to get it permitted and get it going fairly quickly. The project is large and importantly with government support could be operational by 2030, so it could contribute to that stated aim of having a green Olympics. The feasibility study envisages a multi-billion-dollar project to generate up to 2 gigawatts of power for 10 hours or 20,000 megawatt hours of storage, and that is a lot of power. It could power up to 2 million homes in Brisbane. It's sufficiently big that it could reduce Queensland emissions by up to 3%. And in a study, independent study by Axel Allen on the economic impact of the project, which will form part of the feasibility study and is now completed, the Axel Allen report, the project could reduce Queensland power prices by approximately $27 per megawatt hour. That's a reduction, and it would result in a saving of almost $13 billion. So we're miners in this room, or most of us are, so what could it do for the mining industry? And to give you a sense of the scale, it could power 70 SAG mills for 24 hours. I'm not sure there's 70 SAG mills in Queensland, but it could power a lot of SAG mills. Well done, Millie, for this slide. The project's advancing rapidly. In October 2022, the Queensland Government gave the project a coordinated project status. Earlier this year, we completed a geotechnical drilling program that identified the best location for the power chamber. The turbines, which are critical specialist, large and expensive pieces of equipment, we've shortlisted 2 potential suppliers and are engaged with them. The flora and fauna studies have also been completed, and the next really important step is the environmental impact study, which will be submitted in the next couple of years. And I cannot overemphasize here just the social license that Mount Rawdon has, and Joe Mamam has the advantage of having just been the general manager of Mount Rawdon before Cal. He can verify what an amazing social license Mount Rawdon has. It probably has the best social license across our group other than Cal. But it's local workforce. The mine started in, I think it's 25 years ago, by Nick Giorgetta. It employs a lot of local people in the Mount Perry region. It just has an incredible desire. It originally had an 8-year mine life. This will be, I think, by the time it closes, 25 years later, and it's had tremendous support from the local community, and it reflects just how important that social license really is. We aim to have the feasibility study completed by June next year. Importantly, all the work done to date in building the case and all the work we've done so far suggests that Mount Rawdon will be commercially very attractive and have the lowest risk and lowest cost of capacity when ranked against all other pumped hydro projects in Australia that are subject to construction. So I don't want to be upset Simon, because his is already in construction. In concluding, I do want to leave you with a few thoughts that hopefully triangulates this whole story. Firstly, I do hope that I've convinced you that whilst Mount Rawdon sits in a very lonely space in our portfolio, being very short mine life, it is a valuable and strategic asset to us. Secondly, the amount of copper that is required to build the required renewable capacity, the transmission lines that is required to connect them, and the electric motor vehicles that will be needed to be built, which, by the way, have 4 kilometres of copper wires in every electric motor vehicle, will be very, very good for the copper price, and hence our acquisition of North Parkes and Ernest Henry will be well exposed to that. Thirdly, the cost of all of this is going to be unbelievably high if we are going to get anywhere near the renewable targets. Governments will literally have to spend trillions and trillions of dollars, which is going to be inflationary, and that's going to be good for gold. So, pulling all of this together, and as we enter the holiday season, it seems appropriate to end with a quote that is so relevant for everyone in this room who share the love of our industry. It's from Max Planck, the father of quantum mechanics, who won the Nobel Physics Prize in 1918, when he said something that I think may be even more relevant today when we think about the challenge of this transition, where he said, oh, sorry, that's where we're at, I've talked about all of that. When he said, mining is not everything, but without mining, everything is nothing. So Julian, thank you for the work you've done at the Mining Club. Been incredible. I thought you'd like this quote, because I think it reflects what we all think and believe in the sector. It's what we love about the sector, and you've done an unbelievable job at the Sydney Mining Club. We thank you for that effort. We look forward to obviously seeing your ongoing membership and involvement, and I'm sure advice to Graham. But well done, and thank you on behalf of everyone here. Happy holidays, or are we having some Q&A?
You're in the firing line over there.
Okay.